The 48th lesson in the series. And I had thought that maybe we would complete it today. I don't know that that's going to be the case. I'll keep my eyes on the clock. I somewhat doubt that we will. I tend to get long-winded at times, and well, you already know that. You've seen me do it now for 47 lessons, so this is number 48. We are down to Romans chapter 16 at verse 17. And we are beginning to deal with something that Paul is instructing the church relative to false teachers. Okay? This zeroes in on false teachers. And there's some reasons why that we're going to do a little bit of study in this to see exactly what the purpose of this is, why it's given to the church this way. So this exhortation to mark and avoid false teachers, it's found in verses 17 and 18. Now I beseech you, brethren, mark them which cause divisions and offenses contrary to the doctrine which ye have learned, and avoid them. For they that are such serve not our Lord Jesus Christ, but their own belly, and by good words and fair speeches deceive the hearts of the simple. Now this isn't talking about just your rank and file church member that happens to get in trouble and leave the church. This is talking directly about false teachers, and I'm going to show you that as we move forward. The first thing I want you to see, he uses this word mark them. Mark, that comes from the Greek word skopeo, which means to pay careful attention to look out for, to notice. There's nothing wrong with a man of God marking a false teacher and pointing out the fact that he is one, to warn people to stay away from the guy. I don't feel bad at all about telling you, you probably ought to ignore, who's the guy that makes you scream? Joel Osteen. There's a false teacher, stay away from him. That's about the most ridiculous example that I could give you, but you get the point. Paul tells us to mark these people. This word contrary, and this is why it's talking about false teachers. We're to mark them which cause divisions and offenses contrary to the doctrine. Contrary to the doctrine. Contrary means opposite, adverse, moving against or in an opposite direction. Something, now if it's opposite of truth, what is it? It's false. So someone that comes along and is preaching something that's contrary to the doctrine that Paul gave us is a false teacher, and we're to mark them and avoid them, stay away from them. Okay? Now, the reason that this is important is because there are divisions that happen that are in accordance with the doctrine. There are divisions that occur within churches that are in accord. They're not contrary to the doctrine. They're in accordance with the doctrine. I want you to look at Luke chapter 12. Luke chapter 12. Verses 51 through 53. Suppose ye that I am come to give peace on earth? I tell you nay, but rather division. Now here's a division that happens as a result of the doctrine. This is in accordance with it. This isn't contrary to anything he's saying. He's telling us what this division is. For from henceforth there shall be 5 in one house divided, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. The father shall be divided against the son, and the son against the father, the mother against the daughter, and the daughter against the mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. There are divisions that happen in the church just by means of the fact that our doctrine is different than most people tend to think it is. And there will be divisions caused. Those are not contrary to the doctrine. You don't have to mark everyone that you have ever met that doesn't agree with you on doctrine. What would be the point of that? You'd mark everybody that the whole world would be walking around with mark. You'd be pointing out everybody that you see at the Publix. That's not what he's saying. So the divisions that happen in accordance with the doctrine, that's different. Look at Acts chapter 19. And I'm pretty sure that most of you have run into these types of divisions and are very familiar with them. Acts chapter 19, verses 8 through 10. And he went, this is Paul, he went into the synagogue and spake boldly for the space of 3 months, disputing and persuading the things concerning the kingdom of God. But when divers were hardened and believed not, but spake evil of that way before the multitude, he departed from them, and separated the disciples, disputing daily in the school of one Tyrannus. And this continued by the space of 2 years, so that all they which dwelt in Asia heard the word of the Lord Jesus, both Jews and Greeks. So this is, those of you that were here when we first started the church, you remember there were people in that room that never got in the water. We didn't land everybody. That room was divided because there were people that did not agree with the doctrine. That's not what Paul's talking about over in Romans 16. He's talking about people that take offense. You know, there's in Galatians chapter 5. Paul's discussing the fact that there are false teachers that have come into the churches of Galatia, and they're teaching works. And he's trying to get them back to looking at grace again, because some of the people are starting to fall back into their old ways again. And he says in chapter 5 and verse 11, "And I, brethren, if I yet preach circumcision, why do I yet suffer persecution?" In other words, he's trying to point out the fact that what he's preaching is different from what these false teachers are preaching, because if it was the same thing, why would they have an issue with it? If Paul was teaching the same thing about circumcision that the Jews were, well, then why would the Jews be mad at him and chasing him? Obviously, he's teaching something different. And he goes on to say, then is the offense of the cross ceased. It's an interesting thing that if you teach works for salvation, all of the offense of the cross goes away. One of the things that I find very, very remarkable is that, have you ever noticed that the Roman Catholics and the Jews are friends? Have you ever noticed that? In the great ecumenical councils, Roman Catholics and Jews are buddies. They get along with each other. How could that be? That's certainly not what I see in the Bible. I look in the Bible and the Jews hated Christians. Nowadays, if the Christians are teaching works, they're no different than the Jews. And the offense of the cross is ceased. So these divisions that come, you know, 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 7 and 8 speak of Christ being a stumbling stone and a rock of offense. You preach the doctrine of Christ, and to some people, they can't get past it. They trip right over the top of it. They can't see it. It's a stumbling stone, and it's offensive to them. The idea that you do not have control over your eternal destiny is a stumbling stone to a lot of people. They just can't get past it. You remember in Romans chapter 9, we dealt with the two first objections that come up when you start to talk about election. The first one, that's not fair. The second one, because God would be unrighteous, it's all about this idea that man has the right to decide for himself. I'm sorry, man doesn't have the right to decide for himself, not when it comes to that, because this is God's creation, not man's. But it's very offensive to people. So those divisions that occur, if I go out and preach the gospel to a room full of people that I've never met before, and some of them love it and some of them hate it, that's just normal. That's not what Paul's referring to over in Romans 16. because he's talking about the folks that cause divisions contrary to the doctrine. Now, you know, there are some people, they don't have a choice. One of our members that I talked to today said that she had some people that she knows listen to some of my tapes, and I think the response was that I sounded like an idiot. Well, thank you. That's a compliment to me. You know why that's a compliment to me? Because in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 18, it says, "For the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness." Well, idiots say things that are foolish. And if you are not in possession of eternal life, I look like an idiot to you. And I should, and that's the proof of the fact. 1 Corinthians 2:14 says, "The natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for their foolishness unto him. Neither can he know them, because they're spiritually discerned." If you run into somebody and you're trying to explain the doctrine to them, and they think you're an idiot, and they think it's foolish, well, you just found somebody that doesn't have the ability to understand it or believe it. Thank God for the experience and move on down the road. Because all it does is just prove what he's been saying all along in the Bible. See, don't think that that's a reflection on you. It's not. It's a reflection on them. It's showing them for exactly who they are, that they're the ones that don't have the ability. Now, back to Romans 16. Those who are to be marked. So let's read the verse again. "I beseech you, brethren," he's serious about using the word beseech. He's serious about this. He's really intrigued. He wants them to get this point. "I beseech you, brethren, mark them which cause divisions and offenses contrary to the doctrine which ye have learned, and avoid them." So we're to mark those that cause divisions based on doctrine that's contrary to the apostolic doctrine that Paul and the apostles taught. In other words, it's the opposite of the truth. People that teach something that is the opposite of the truth, we are to mark and we are to avoid. Okay? And there's good reasons for that. In Galatians chapter 1, Paul makes he makes it pretty plain of what he thinks of these guys that we're talking about here. Galatians chapter 1, verses 6 through 9. "I marvel that ye are so soon removed from him that called you into the grace of Christ unto another gospel, which is not another, but there be some that trouble you and would pervert the gospel of Christ." Now, this other and another, I've been over this before with you. There's two different Greek words. You don't really see it that well in English. In the Greek, it stands out really well. There's two different Greek words that are being used here. One of them is a tros, the other one is a los. I get this confused. I believe that a los means another of the same kind, and a tros means another of a different kind. So if Wendy sends me to the grocery store to buy fruit and she wants me to pick up a bag of oranges, and while I'm at the grocery store she wants another bag of oranges, then she would say pick up a loss, another bag, another of the same kind. But if she wants a bag of apples, she might tell me to pick up another, meaning another fruit, which would be another of a different kind. And that's how these two words lay out. So when he says, "I marvel that ye are so soon removed from him that called you into the grace of Christ unto another gospel," that's another of a different kind, which is not another, which is not one of the same kind. It's a completely different gospel. Now, you can get that with just the English, but the Greek kind of clarifies it a little bit more. This gospel that's taught by these false teachers is completely removed. It's not even the same thing. It's not that we disagree on a couple of things. It's a totally different gospel. If you look at the Roman Catholic theology and compare it to ours, it's not that we're just different on a couple of things. The whole thing is set up completely different. It's a gospel of a completely different kind. And that's what Paul's talking about. which is not another, but there be some that trouble you and would pervert the gospel of Christ. But though we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel unto you than that which we have preached unto you, let him be accursed. I love this verse. I mean, if anything shows the inspiration of the Bible, this verse shows the inspiration of the Bible. Can anybody tell me the first occurrence of an angel preaching a gospel to somebody? Joseph Smith in the 1800s, the founding of the of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons. There it is. Paul mentioned angels preaching this false doctrine, what, almost 2,000 years before it actually happened. God knew it was going to happen. And he didn't care whether it was a man or an angel. If he's preaching something different than Paul preaches, then let him be accursed. Verse 9, as we said before, so say I now again, if any man preach any other gospel unto you than that ye have received, let him be accursed. He said over in Romans chapter 3 and verse 8 that these types of people, that their damnation is just. It's just for these people to be damned. And Peter speaks of those that bring in damnable heresies in 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 1. So when it comes to those who are the enemies of the gospel of Christ and do all within their power to pervert that gospel and to deter the Lord's people from the gospel that God's true ministers are preaching, then it's okay to say, let them be cursed, let them be damned. Paul did it. Now, speaking of the apostolic doctrine that we are to teach, over in 2 John verses 9 and 10, whosoever transgresseth and abideth not in the doctrine of Christ hath not God. He that abideth in the doctrine of Christ, he hath both the Father and the Son. If there come any unto you and bring not this doctrine, the doctrine of the apostles, receive him not into your house, neither bid him Godspeed. For he that biddeth him Godspeed is partaker of his evil deeds. I can't tell you the number of times that I'm contacted by people that want to come before you and sell whatever it is they're trying to sell, whatever mission that they want to go on, whatever it is. You've never seen one of them before, have you? I'm not going to welcome them into this house. If they're teaching any doctrine other than what the apostles teach, they don't stand in this pulpit. And I haven't bothered to mark them, but I could. I haven't really given that much time. Now I want you to notice this command to mark these guys is given to ministers primarily. Look at 1 Timothy chapter 6. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 1 through 5. Let as many servants as are under the yoke count their own masters worthy of all honor, that the name of God and his doctrine be not blasphemed. And they that have believing masters, let them not despise them because they are brethren, but rather do them service because they are faithful and beloved, partakers of the benefit. These things teach and exhort. If any man teach otherwise. Now here's some things that Paul's teaching. And he says, if anybody teaches otherwise, if somebody's teaching something contrary to what I just told you, okay, and consent not to wholesome words, even the words of our Lord Jesus Christ, and to the doctrine which is according to godliness. He is proud, knowing nothing, but doting about questions and strifes of words, whereof come evil strife, railings, evil surmisings, perverse disputings of men of corrupt minds and destitute of the truth, supposing that gain is godliness. From such withdraw thyself. So gospel ministers are charged with marking false teachers and warning you about them and telling you to avoid them. It's one of the things that we're told to do. We're to get away from them. Don't go hang out with those guys. Mark them, stay away from them. And not only do the ministers do that, but we warn you to do the same. Look also at Titus chapter 3. Verses 10 through 11. Where it says that a man that is an heretic after the first and second admonition reject, knowing that he that is such is subverted and sinneth, being condemned of himself. So after 2 admonitions, a heretic is to be rejected. Look at Acts chapter 20, where Paul is speaking to the elders at the church of Ephesus shortly before he leaves them. Acts chapter 20, beginning of verse 28, where he says, "Take heed therefore unto yourselves, and to all the flock over the which the Holy Ghost hath made you overseers, to feed the church of God, which he hath purchased with his own blood. For I know this, that after my departing shall grievous wolves enter in among you, not sparing the flock. Also of your own selves shall men arise, speaking perverse things, to draw away disciples after them. Therefore watch and remember that by the space of 3 years I ceased not to warn everyone night and day with tears." One of the things that we understand very well standing in this position is that there are going to be false teachers that show up. They are going to come into the church. They are going to try to destroy the church. They are going to, now they may not ever get into the pulpit. They might just be sitting out there and trying to grab groups of people together to get them to believe something that's contrary to the doctrine. We've had that happen in this church on numerous occasions, and we've marked the people that did it. That's something that happens. It's something that the pastor has to be ever vigilant of, to keep his eyes open to see if there's any wolves out there, because they do show up. It happened to Paul. It's happened to every church that we've ever had anything to do with, and it's happened here, and it'll happen here again. We know this. So that's why we're warned about it. Now, Paul instructed Timothy over in 1 Timothy chapter 5 that against an elder receive not an accusation, but before 2 or 3 witnesses, them that sin rebuke before all. If you got 2 witnesses against an elder and you bring the accusation and it's proven, let everybody know about it, that others may also fear. So there's to be a marking of false teachers by pastors, and there's to be a warning to congregations to avoid them. But here comes the question: what if it's the pastor? What if it's your own pastor? What if he's the guy that starts teaching false doctrine? What if, because it happens, it has happened in the past. What about them? Paul himself said right here in Acts that that also among your own selves shall men, he was talking to these elders, among your own selves shall men arise. We've had the occasion, we had the first man that Elder Mott ever ordained turned out to be a rotter. So what happens in the, what do you do then? Well, that's where the Lord has given us a wonderful system of checks and balances, and that's why it's in Romans chapter 16. Romans chapter 16 wasn't written to a pastor. Romans chapter 16 was written to the saints. It was written to church members, telling them that if someone comes before you, even if it's your own pastor, and he starts teaching false doctrine, then you're to mark that man and you're to avoid him. You see, God's ministers are not immune, or are they excluded from church discipline? We have to follow the same rules that y'all have to follow. We're just a member that has an extra gift, that's all. We have to follow the same rules. I start teaching something that I ought not be teaching, then it's up to you to call me on it and follow the rules that we've taught you before on church discipline. The pastor is not, he's not in any way immune from that, especially when it comes to heresy. Look at Philippians chapter 3. Philippians chapter 3, verses 17 through 19. Brethren, be followers together of me, and mark them which walk, so as ye have us for an example. For many walk, of whom I have told you often, and now tell you even weeping, that they are the enemies of the cross of Christ, whose end is destruction, whose God is their belly, and whose glory is in their shame, who mind earthly things. So, while pastors rule in the church, they are not immune to discipline should they go bad. They start teaching something contrary to the Word of God, it's up to the church to do something about it. And the instructions are given to you right here to mark them. In Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 7, it says, remember them which have the rule over you, who have spoken unto you the word of God. There's your pastor. Whose faith follow. You're not required to follow any of my opinions if I don't have book, chapter, and verse to back them up. You're not required to follow that. You're required to follow things when I've got book, chapter, and verse. Aside from that, it may just be opinion. I remember my father in the ministry had a little saying for Uncle Conrad's bedtime stories. There were some times when this ain't doctrine. I'm not putting this out for doctrine. This is just what I'm thinking off the top of my head. Okay? So sometimes we run into that. But if a man starts teaching false doctrine, remember that a pastor, while he rules, his rule is administrative, it's not legislative. I am not allowed to make up a bunch of rules and a bunch of laws that I don't have book, chapter, and verse for, and enforce them upon you and make you do things that God never told you to do. I'm not allowed to do that. And if I start doing that, you better call me on it. That's not appropriate. We have a former member that left the church primarily because I wouldn't make up those kinds of rules. She wanted certain rules made up, and I refused to do it. Now, verse 18 says, let me get back to it again. For they that are such serve not our Lord Jesus Christ, but their own belly, and by good words and fair speeches deceive the hearts of the simple. Let's contrast this with the Apostle Paul. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 4. 1 Corinthians chapter 4. Let's see if the Apostle Paul was one that served his own belly and gave fair speeches to deceive people. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 9. For I think that God hath set forth us the apostles last, as it were, appointed to death, for we are made a spectacle unto the world, and to angels, and to men. We're fools for Christ's sake, but ye are wise in Christ. We are weak, but ye are strong. Ye are honorable, but we are despised. Even unto this present hour we both hunger and thirst, and are naked, and are buffeted, and have no certain dwelling place, and labor, working with our own hands, being reviled we bless, Being persecuted, we suffer. Being defamed, we entreat. We are made as the filth of the world and are the offscourging of all things unto this day. I write not these things to shame you, but as my beloved sons, I warn you. You see, the Apostle Paul, he wasn't looking out for his own belly. He was doing the job that he was called to do. Sometimes churches start to get small and they can't support a man anymore, and the man's got to go to work. That happens, it happens. When Wendy and I first moved down here, I think for the first 18 months, I had a full-time job as well as serving the church. Church finally got to the point where it could support me, so I laid that aside and went to work as a full-time pastor. If the church ever got to the point where they don't support me anymore, then I guess I got to go back to work. But because I'm not here for that. Money's not that's not why I'm here. I'm here because God called me to preach the gospel. But there's a lot of these guys, that's not how they look at it. Not at all. And it says they deceive by using good words. Good words. In other words, Scripture. They use Scripture. They deceive people by using Scripture. How many times have you heard, usually during an altar call, and him that cometh to me I will in no wise cast out? You ever heard that one during an altar call? I heard that one all the time. That's over in John chapter 6, the second half of verse 37. But they never quote the first half of verse 37, which says, all that the Father giveth me shall come to me, and him that cometh to me I will in no wise cast out. They teach it as if it's some sort of universal offer of eternal salvation to whoever will come, when in reality it's just Christ making the point that all of those that were chosen before the foundation of the world will come to him, and he won't cast them out when they do. Completely different. Now you see how that's contrary to the doctrine that the apostles taught? And all the while is designed to deceive the hearts of the simple. How many times you heard this one? I know my wife will like this one. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man will hear my voice and open the door, I will come in to him and will sup with him and he with me. There you go. There's another offer, right? That's a universal offer of the opportunity for anyone to gain eternal salvation. But there's an important part in here that you have to pay attention to, and it says, behold, I stand in the door and knock, if any man hear my voice. If any man hear my voice. You got to be able to hear him. Remember what we read over in John chapter 8 and verse 43, where Christ is talking to some Pharisees, and he says, why do you not understand my speech? Even because ye cannot hear my words. They couldn't hear his voice. So that verse over in Revelation has nothing to do with them. You got to be able to hear him in order for this to apply. And in verse 47 of John chapter 8, it says that he that is of God heareth God's words, and ye hear them not, because ye are not of God. You've got to be born again first in order to hear. In John chapter 5 and verse 24, it says, verily, verily, I say unto you, he that heareth my word, and believeth on him that sent me, hath everlasting life, and shall not come into condemnation, but is passed from death into life. These are people that are already born again. So that's not an offer of eternal salvation to anybody, that's any Tom, Dick, and Harry that's walking down the street. Not at all. He's talking to people that are already born again. Now, do you see how the other position is teaching something contrary to the doctrine that the apostles gave us? Absolutely. And the man that stands in a pulpit and says that needs to be marked, and you need to avoid him. Okay, that's what these verses are teaching. Look over at Psalm chapter 91. Psalm 91, verses 11 and 12. For he shall give his angels charge over thee, to keep thee in all thy ways. They shall bear thee up in their hands, lest thou dash thy foot against a stone. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Well, look over at Luke chapter 4, where this verse is quoted, and I want you to see who it is that quotes this verse. Luke chapter 4, shortly after Christ's baptism. Beginning at verse 9. And he, that's the devil, brought him to Jerusalem and set him on a pinnacle of the temple and said unto him, If thou be the Son of God, cast thyself down from hence. For it is written, now he's going to quote Psalm, He shall give his angels charge over thee to keep thee, and in their hands they shall bear thee up, lest at any time thou dash thy foot against a stone. And Jesus answering said unto him, It is said, Thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. Satan himself uses Scripture and twists it around to deceive the hearts of the simple. Don't be surprised. Don't be a bit surprised if one of these guys comes along. Oh, they're eloquent, much more eloquent than I am. They know language much better than I do, but they're not teaching truth. And they're here to just see. This is one of the ways that the devil is able to keep most people in these false churches, because they listen to the guy, and he's very good at deceiving them. Now, it says that they deceive the heart of the simple. In Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 15, it says, The simple believeth every word, but the prudent man looketh well to his going. You know, there are some folks that they don't care what comes out of a pulpit. As long as it's coming out of a pulpit, they're going to believe it. And even if the guy contradicts himself, contradicts what he said 3 minutes ago, they'll still believe it. Those are the folks that are simple. And there's some people that they get to where they respect the pastor so much they believe every word he says. Even if he's wrong, they believe it. Don't be one of those people. Please, don't be one of those. Don't do that to me. You know, we're told that the Bereans were more noble. The church in Thessalonica, if you look at the letters that Paul wrote to the different churches, you will find that the church at Thessalonica was the most spiritual church out of any of the churches that he wrote to. Corinth, not so much. Galatians, no way. But Thessalonica, that was the spiritual church. And these Bereans over in Acts were more noble than them. Why? Because they received the word with all readiness of mind and searched the Scriptures daily whether those things were so. They trusted, but they verified. They took what the man said and they verified what he said. And that's what you should do. There's a couple of benefits from this. There really is. If you take what I preach today and then you go home over the course of the week and you spend a few minutes every day looking at it, you have the advantage of YouTube. It's right there. I've given you the outline. Go verify that the definitions I've given you are accurate. Look them up in a dictionary. Make sure I'm telling you the truth. Go look at the verses that I've quoted and look at them and look up the words. Make sure that what I'm telling you is truth. There's two benefits to that. The first benefit is that you're going to find out I'm telling you the truth. So you don't have to worry about marking me and avoiding me because I'm telling you what the Bible says. That's benefit number one. Benefit number two, you're going to take what I teach today and you're going to transfer that from short-term memory into long-term memory. You know, everything that you have ever heard is up here. Do you know that? Everything's up here. Every sermon you have ever heard in your life, it's up here. The problem is you usually don't know how to find it. You know, when I was in business, we had, before we moved down here, we had a filing room that had, I don't know, 15 filing cabinets in it, I think. The 5-drawer legal size filing, I mean, take up a whole wall. And on top of those, we had banker's boxes full of files because we had to keep our files for 5 years. So we had files for everything we'd done in the last 5 years. And they were in those filing cabinets. But if we don't have a system for knowing which filing cabinet they're in, good luck. Good luck finding it. You go looking by name and it's not filed by name, it's filed by address, well, good, you're going to be there forever trying to find the thing. That's the problem with short-term memory. It's there, it's in the filing cabinet, but you don't know, you don't have the sheet that tells you which filing cabinet to go get to. If you transfer it into long-term memory, well, now you know which filing cabinet it's in, and you know exactly where to go get it. So when you need it, it's there. So if you, rather than listen to 700 sermons a day, take one and digest it and absorb it and make it your own and transfer it from short-term to long-term memory, and you'll have it forever. And it'll be there, and you'll grow as a result of that. And you'll be able to prove that I'm telling you the truth to start with. And that's really the job of that's how you become more noble than those in Thessalonica. You trust what I say, but then you go ahead and verify it. In 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 21, Paul says, prove all things. Hold fast that which is good. Prove them. Somebody comes to you with something, prove it. Prove that, don't just listen to them. One of my pet peeves, and I get a lot of this stuff, people that will find some article somewhere that they read and copy it to an email and send it out to 5 million people. Well, did you verify any of it? Or is it just saying what you wanted to say, so you're sending it to me? Because now, if you don't tell me that you verify it, now I got to go verify it. Before I send it to anybody here, I got to make sure it's right. Most of it, I don't have the time to mess with it. But we're to prove things. We're to make sure that things are accurate before we send them out. Okay? What are we doing here? I think we can get this next part, and then we'll hold off until next week. Verses 19 and 20. Paul is commending the church at Rome for their faith. Let's go back here. Romans chapter 16, verses 19 and 20. For your obedience is come abroad unto all men. I am glad, therefore, on your behalf, but yet I would have you wise unto that which is good, and simple concerning evil. And the God of peace shall bruise Satan under your feet shortly. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you. Amen. I'm going to have more to say about the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you. Amen. When we get down to verse 24, because it's almost exactly the same thing. And that is Paul's salutation. And we'll go through that next week. One of the things that you can find about Paul's letters is he closes the letters this way. It's one of the ways that you can look at his letters and you know they're his. It's kind of like if you always sign the letter sincerely yours in your name, and every letter you've ever written is a form of sincerely yours in your name, pretty obvious that that's yours when somebody sees it, right? Whereas if you sign it with a whole bunch of different things, well, it may or may not be. But we'll go through that next week when we get down to verse 24. So a couple of things here. Their faith is spoken of throughout the whole world, and Paul would have them wise to that which is good and simple concerning evil. Now this has to be considered in the light of verses 17 through 18 that we just read, where Paul was talking about false teachers. He wants the Roman saints to be able to discern good doctrine from false doctrine. Okay? I don't want you to be so simple that you can't tell false doctrine when you see it. But I want you to be free from involvement with evil doctrine. In Proverbs chapter 14, and verse 8, we read, "The wisdom of the prudent is to understand his way, but the folly of fools is deceit. He wants them to be wise to that which is good." Look at 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 12. "For our rejoicing is this, the testimony of our conscience, that in simplicity and godly sincerity, not with fleshly wisdom, but by the grace of God we have our conversation in the world, and more abundantly to you word." See, the wisdom that comes from God, that's what He wants you to be wise relative to those things, but not so much with the world. Okay? And finally, 2 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 3. "But I fear lest by any means, as the serpent beguiled Eve through his subtlety, so your minds should be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ." And this is one of the reasons. You know, one of the things that false teachers do is they follow their boss's pattern. Not that hard to find or to understand. If you turn back to Genesis chapter 3, it says, "Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall you touch it, lest you die." God didn't say you couldn't touch it. God put them into the Garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it. How do you dress a tree if you don't touch it? You see, secondhand knowledge. Have you ever tried that? I used to do this when I was like a Cub Scout coach, or whatever they call them, a Cub master. And I would whisper something to the first little guy on the bench, and he would whisper the same thing to the next one and go all the way around the room. By the time he got back to me, it wasn't even close to what I started with. Well, this is the same kind of a thing. Secondhand knowledge. People start changing things around. "And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die. For God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil." Now this is something that this is a pattern that false teachers will follow. First, they begin to question the simple teaching of the Word of God. They'll read something like Ephesians chapter 1, "According as He hath chosen us in Him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and without blame before Him in love, having predestinated us unto the adoption of children to Jesus Christ by Himself, according to the good pleasure of His will." And they'll say, "What does that really mean that?" They'll read Romans chapter 9, where it says, "For Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated." And they'll say, well, God doesn't hate anybody. They start to question it. God is love. God doesn't hate him. That just means He doesn't like him. He didn't like Esau as much as He liked Jacob. See, they question the Word of God. Then they start to change the plain teaching. They deny the plain teaching. They change it. And this has been going on ever since the Garden of Eden. It's what they do. They will read a verse and then tell you, well, that means X. Well, it means what it says. It doesn't mean something contrary to what it says. And so many of these guys are teaching something that's exactly the opposite of what God's Word says. That's why they need so many versions. That's why they come up with all the versions, so they don't have to make it as obvious when they change it. But that's what they've been doing ever since the Garden of Eden. And in 2 Peter chapter 2, there's an interesting statement relative to false teachers. Second Peter chapter 2, verse 1. But there were false prophets also among the people, even as there shall be false teachers among you, who privily shall bring in damnable heresies, even denying the Lord that bought them, and bring upon themselves swift destruction. And many shall follow their pernicious ways, by reason of whom the way of truth shall be evil spoken of. You know, Christianity really took it on the chin back when, what was his name? Tammy Faye's husband? Jim Baker and Tammy Faye Baker, the first time they ended up in jail. Christianity took it on the chin for that. They weren't teaching the truth, but because people labeled that as Christianity, we all had to suffer. That's what it means by this. Many will follow their pernicious ways, by reason of whom the way of truth shall be evil spoken of. Those false teachers make us look bad with the stuff they're teaching. It hurts us. It makes it harder for us to approach someone because of the Jimmy Swaggarts and the Jim and Tammy Faye Bakers of the world. Okay? But the part I want to really pull in on here is that though there were false prophets also among the people, even as, that means in like manner, even as there shall be false teachers among you. To the same degree that there were false prophets among the people in the Old Testament days, there will be false teachers among us in the New Testament age. Does that make sense? Now I want you to flip back to 1 Kings. Let's go back to our old friend Elijah. First Kings chapter 18, verses 17 through 19. And it came to pass, when Ahab saw Elijah, that Ahab said unto him, Art thou he that troubleth Israel? And he answered, I have not troubled Israel, but thou, and thy father's house, in that thou hast forsaken the commandments of the Lord, and hast followed Balaam. Now therefore send and gather to me all Israel under Mount Carmel, and the prophets of Baal 450, and the prophets of the groves 400, which eat at Jezebel's table. You have Elijah and 850 false prophets. 850 to 1. It sounds about right. Just like there was, how many churches we got in Lakeland? Close to 800 of them? How many people we have in, ministers we have in Lakeland that teach the sovereign grace of God? I know one. You see, the odds are, look around. Look how rare it is in this day and age to find somebody that actually teaches the truth. But it's always been that way. It was that way in Elijah's day. And churches started to get corrupted as soon as the apostles started to start churches. The devil was right there with his ministers to try to pervert those churches and turn them into his, to the point that he finally, when he realized that persecution wasn't going to work, he found out that the only thing he could do is counterfeit it. Counterfeit Christianity. That's the only way he could stay in business. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, we're told an interesting thing about this. 2 Corinthians 11, verses 12 through 15. But what I do, that I will do, that I may cut off occasion from them which desire occasion, that wherein they glory, they may be found even as we. Now he's talking about false teachers here. He says, for such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ. And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Therefore it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works. Their end shall be according to their works. Look at Revelation chapter 20. This is the good news. Revelation chapter 20, verses 12 through 13. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books according to their works. Now remember, we're talking about these false apostles being judged according to their works. And here we've got people being judged according to their works. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them, and they were judged every man according to their works. And death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death, and whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. You do not want to be judged according to your works, folks. Everyone that's judged according to their works ends up in the lake of fire at the end of time. You don't want to be judged according to that. These false teachers are. And that brings us to verse 20. And the God of peace shall bruise Satan under your feet shortly. The God of peace shall bruise Satan under your feet shortly. This is a promise of the second coming, because that's when that will occur. That finally, when Christ returns and he's sent into the lake of fire with all the others. Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15, we read, And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. The day is coming when Satan will be judged, and that's going to occur at the second coming. And Paul closes this passage with the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you. Amen. And that's a fitting place for me to close for this morning. We'll pick back up again next week, Lord willing, and I believe we can finish it up next week. That said, let's stand and be dismissed in prayer.